Hello, everybody. You probably recognize me. I'm Matt Hudson, Chief of Contracting for DIMS. Um, don't worry, this is still JR and Dominique's project, so you'll see them posting. But since I actually happen to be here in DC, we figured we would get together and kind of take this opportunity to talk about some of the feedback that we've gotten on the new Customer X initiative. So I'm kind of filling in on this fireside chat. So I have with me Sandy McIntyre. It says here you're the PM of something called JOMUS. You
Yes,
want to
sir.
tell us a little bit about that?
Certainly. So, yes, Sandy McIntyre, and JOMUS is the Joint Operational Medicine Information Systems Program Office. So, we do everything related to operational medicine. So, this is a unique space, but we are taking electronic health record capabilities and other operational solutions to the warfighter. So, this is going on to ships into forward deployed spaces. So that is the area that I cover in the PODIMS portfolio.
Great. Um, and so you've been with us a long time. When I showed up here, you were a cost estimator back in, I don't know,
2014.
10 years ago or something, right? So, and you switched over to do some work for DIMSUM on the acquisition side, doing things like Segment 2 and some of these peripheral RevX items that are kind of adjacent to what you're doing now, and then went over to EADS, and at one point you were the chief engineer. I'm probably getting all this stuff out of order, but I guess you would say you've kind of seen this from all angles at this point, right? So, and I think, it's interesting because you were kind of pushing back on me earlier today of like, why am I the one that's doing leading PEO 3.0? And we said, well, if you look back a few years, we started this as like the JOMUS acquisition strategy,
Yep.
remember? And so it was very JOMUS focused. And then we decided, you know what? That's probably how we should do things as an enterprise, right? And so we kind of pivoted and did all of that. And I think, as Ms. George put up her video a few weeks ago talking about, PEO 3.0 as a whole doesn't really work unless all of the individual elements are working, right?
Mm.
And so I think what we've seen is, as we've observed, we've rolled out Workplace 3, we've rolled out Workforce 3, we're getting very close with DevMac, and I think you'll see as this approach with Customer X goes, it's an approach that we're going to go with that's very similar to how we're going to satisfy what we were calling the federal X as a service, and now we're kind of calling DevX, but no one loves the name, so we're still trying to figure all of that stuff out. Whatever we end up calling that requirement, I think is going to roll out very similarly to this one. So we really are trying to kind of learn all of these different things, and I think one of the big one of the or probably the big outcome from the JOMUS acquisition strategy, which is still I think the only one that's ever been approved within OSD for us to operate this way, is we wanted to make it a reality and we wanted to go attack these things. And so you're kind of running into now you have to execute all of this stuff. And um, I think if you take that spectrum of DoD to modern, we're kind of caught in no man's land right now, right? And we're taking a lot of bullets because we're in that field, and we kind of gotta. I think what we've decided is we need to basically run to the other side, right? Like we need to get there. We need to get all of this stuff accelerated, and so we've looked at how can we do that, right? Because you and I worked very closely together on the MHS Genesis contract all those years ago, and we took the 18 months to get it out, and we took literally every minute that we had available. SecDef was calling us the day of release, like, where is this? Where is this? Where is literally every second that we had, right? And we did that because we knew we were locking in for 10 years. So I would have loved to put more time into it because, you're going to live with this thing for a very long time. And it's not that it hasn't worked well, it's worked very well, but there's a lot of things we've learned over that time period that we can really leverage now. And I think as you look at doing JOMUS more modularly, we can't wait 5-6 years to stabilize and then learn those lessons. So we can't afford to take those things at face value. And so Customer X is really a lot about that and really getting to what I kind of think of in my mind as these sacred cows. Like, and I think you would agree. You're running into all of them now with testing and cyber and what everybody calls user adoption and change management. So that's where we started. So thankfully, right now we don't have to deal with testing and cyber. That'll be probably on the DevX side, and they have very powerful constituents and all this stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna have bigger challenges there. But I feel like user adoption is something that we can attack, and if we get it right, we can implement it how we want to, right? And so there's some big opportunity here for us to learn a little bit on an easy one, and so that's where we started this discussion. But as we had this conversation a few weeks ago, about how is PEO 3.0 going, what's missing, we identified some of those things that we would kind of say are outside of your DevOps infinity loop. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit more about how you see that and how CustomerX sort of evolved out of
Evolved.
that discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you just said, Joe leaned way in on the new software acquisition pathway acquisition approach, a full portfolio broken into smaller, more agile projects, and DevSecOps, the buzzword, right? Looking at that, and again, to your point, PU 3.0, perfect for the DevSecOps development type of construct, thinking about how you're going to get that feedback early and often, and that's everything that we're going to do well with DevMac in the future, and quite frankly, how Jomis has structured all of their existing development efforts right now. But then when we started getting to that ops side of the DevSecOps, everybody's like, well, is that this ops? Is that where deployment and training and all that magic happens? And the answer is no, right? That's really the ops loop to ensure that you're continuing to provide good software and get that feedback back into that the agile pipeline. So there was this whole space that when we were looking at just the original building blocks of PEO 3.0 that we were bringing forward as what we thought was a potential gap. And for Jomis in particular, which has a very long history in the Team at J current legacy portfolio of doing this in a very disconnected way. Historically, we have built software and then turned it over to our service acquisition program offices, who then further tested it, cybered it, and then ultimately trained and deployed it. And so, as the individual responsible for that software, there was no way to do a DevSecOps on that. It was so far removed in terms of the layers that were added and the time that occurred between. So we're trying to pull that construct in, try to in essence build those building blocks for how we can deploy and train with this very close connection to developing good software that we can pivot, we can learn from. So building that right training approach along with it, building software from the beginning that users love, that maybe doesn't require all of the heavy deployment and training. And well, deployment is a little bit different, but training and user adoption, looking at that very differently in terms of out of the gate designing software with the user in mind, from the beginning, and then finding those right training approaches that complement that paradigm, building IT help desk and all that other infrastructure. Those are all the things that we're really looking at as filling out the holes in the CustomerX space.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, right? Because again, and you may be the wrong person to ask this question because you did the LCC way back when, but would you be surprised to learn that change management and user adoption are the single biggest investment that we've made on the MHS Genesis side this whole way through, right?
Yeah, right.
And I don't even say that like it's a bad thing, because I think we've actually budgeted more than we've spent, but it is
a big driver,
very large investment. And I think what we've seen is a lot of what we did in the market research phase of that that particular procurement, even for the giant enterprise system, a lot of what we ended up with was very DoD specific, because people said, you must do change management, you must do user adoption. And we would say, ignorant as we were, what does that even mean? And frankly, nobody could really tell us. So we went out to the market and said, okay, what do the hospital systems do? And so I think you see a lot of those things. And we sort of walked into MHS Genesis knowing we've probably over padded this a little bit compared to commercial, right? And so I think as we saw during execution, that what really hits home is some of the stuff that we did with the leadership teams, in terms of Dr. Kennelly and all those folks preparing them.
Yes.
The parallel charting, those were the big hitters.
Yep, your peers.
Yeah, well, and I think to your point, like those were some of the lowest touch labor activities that we had, but we were still locked into a very heavy touch thing. And so looking at all of those things, we really said, how can we become more adaptive as we execute, right? And we said, we don't want to be locked into an approach for 10 years, even 3 years. So what we find is our peers in the hospital space, if they mess something up, they
can pivot
quite quickly, right? And take a different approach. And so we've come up with something different in the CSO, tried to take advantage of the CSO to build on the paradigm of, on Workforce 3, on Workplace 3. We tried to build the RFP together. And we're trying to do that still now, but now we're also trying to build the awards together. And that means subsequent awards as well. And so taking the openness of that CSO and allowing us, putting language in the pods that allow us to evolve over time, what we're really looking for is how can we start small, get something awarded that's relatively low risk. And so do you want to chat about, kind of where you're thinking the pods are going to go and what might be coming just for JOMUS? And I would say this is just for JOMUS. Right. CustomerX is for everyone in our lovely portfolio.
I'm just the first customer.
But just to give people an idea of what might be out there.
Yes, absolutely. So as I said, we've pivoted to a portfolio approach. So, for a while, JOMUS was focused only on an increment one big, gigantic waterfall project. We now are doing multiple projects in parallel. And then I have this problem space. So we made a determination to start with our blood product. That is the pod, as Matt said, that is on the street right now. And we felt like it was the perfect one, small in scale, to give us the opportunity to get some artifacts, out there, get the feedback from industry, and be able to, in a very short period of time, get a partner on board with us so that we could learn and grow this requirement live, as opposed to that back and forth of our RFPs, right? So behind that, though, is a whole portfolio. And so, and I identified this as a gap that is across the entire portfolio. So in terms of, that scope and size, some of the other near-term ones, we have a unique situation with the DHMS program office that we now have an MHS Genesis disconnected capability that will come with some training content, but we need to train that. That was not in the original, training scope. So the MHS Genesis Theater is another very close pod that the team is working on. We also, and I referenced it earlier, need an IT help desk. Right now, we were exploring that whole unique ecosystem of having service desks that are with the service PMOs, as I referenced earlier. You have the global service desk, and then so what does that look like? That's complicated, and it's such a critical building block, and that would be something portfolio-wide. So what you're going to start seeing is that the pods will grow, and some of them in the near term are a product only. But then we also want to have a near-term pod that is that enterprise across the portfolio approach. And so you'll see that IT help desk in the very near term as well. So those are some of the close, but like growing as the year continues, and you'll see this, out on our other documentation. You can see the full scope of the seven different building block areas and the diversity of the JOMAS portfolio only, not to mention the rest of the PODIM's teammates.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, right? And when we started kicking this off, we started kind of looking at, how do we take best practices from COVID, right? And not COVID from like our response to it, but the literal virus itself. And so we said, like, look at all these variants, and they crowd each other out in the successful ones. And so I think you see what we've kind of set up within the pods is we've tried to leave ourselves room for the pods to multiply in number, as you said, and that might split across horizontal, like ITSM, or a vertical, like a product, like theater blood or HCD. They could theoretically do both.
Yep.
The pods could grow bigger.
They could.
They could eventually divide. They could collapse into each other and eat each other. And so all of these different possibilities are there. And so that's where we want to start. And I think, this is an enterprise contract, or enterprise CSO, I shouldn't say contract. It's probably going to have many contract awards on it, right? And I think it will scale a lot. And so, but what we're trying to do is start small. So if we do stumble, we're limiting the risk of that, right? And so that's kind of the perspective. We're not trying to kind of limit, but what we have built in, if you take notice in some of the language, are the option clauses there. Because when we first discussed this, one of your concerns was, what if I get someone in and they're doing a great job and I don't want to go recompete this every 9 months? And so how we would responded to that was to basically build in options to say, if you are transforming, if you are hitting the value proposition, if you are satisfying the innovativeness definition of the CSO, then we will go ahead and give you an option for the next period, right? And so that's where we want to kind of, so when we talk about evolution, we've allowed for the strong variants to continue, but it's on you, or on you, industry, to show us that you're doing that, right? And so it's not just automatic. You have to show us that you're innovative and that you are evolving, right? So I think what we're trying to avoid is to get stuck in that paradigm of, we know there's a right answer, but that's not what we have on contract, so we're not going to do that. All that kind of stuff, right? And so, we talked about it. If you read, we've put in a value spectrum on these. This one is what we call on the value end of the spectrum, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about what we mean about that, because it's not like this is important to you and you're not sinking a decent chunk of money into it. But where we looked at it was, okay, a lot of people, when they see we want transformation and we want innovation, they mean that we want to, or they think we mean that we want to significantly raise the quality level or something like that, right? And I don't think that's necessarily the core of innovation. And I think this is a good example of the more adoption we're able to get for fewer dollars, the more products you'll be able to roll out. And that's really how we're looking at this. And I think when we look at it as a value paradigm, if you come in with something that is very traditional DoD, very labor intensive and very expensive, it's going to be kind of a non-starter for us, right? For a lot of reasons. But we kind of joked before this, we're putting this together, we wanted to seize this opportunity to do it rapidly, but this is kind of our production value level, right? If you're
high quality
spending millions of dollars in B&P, that is not the answer, right? You're automatically off on the wrong foot. So, and I, take this video, show it to your CEO. I can't tell you enough. We're not looking for expensive proposals. We really are deliberately trying to find ways to save you as much B&P cash as possible. And we're not going to grade you on that stuff in any way, shape, or form. And so we're really looking for people with good ideas. And that's where we want to try to get folks through that first phase quickly, so that we can enter into the bilateral part of the conversation where we kind of design the award together. And so a lot of the specifics and nitty gritty, we're kind of deliberately not trying to take care of right now. Because we'll do that together when we select someone, right? So that's kind of the point. I think this one being a value one, your team put together a lot of stuff, and so we've been very prescriptive about kind of, giving you old statements of work. We released the BUE, which I don't think we've ever done before here. It's been something that we've philosophically kind of been against, but we said, you know what, it makes sense to do it this time, and we're going to do it. I know a lot of people have questions. Your team's working on them.
Exactly.
And I think it's fair to say already that industry has highlighted some assumptions that were wrong, right?
Exactly.
So you'll be seeing updates on those. But the important thing is those are very easy things for us to resolve, I think, right? And so I don't want that to discourage people from participating, because really, if you have a good idea here, we're going to find a way to get it on a pod. So that's all that I had. Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to your early comment about us from, spending 18 months getting a requirement, perfect, so that then we could go into another, year, of discussions. The reason why I'm excited about this is so that we can learn differently and more meaningfully sooner, right? And so I'm excited about the CSO concept of being able to find the right partner in a very interactive way with industry. So I just, very much appreciate the questions. I appreciate you growing with us as we figure this out. I really do think it's not only an exciting opportunity for JOMIS, but for PU DIMS in general. But yeah, so I'm excited about what's come, and just keep holding us accountable.
Yep. And keep putting in the feedback. Like I said, we started working on it within minutes, and we'll probably have it out within a couple days. The goal is to kind of keep this within our 3-week sprints. So hopefully that's working out. We appreciate you guys taking the time. Appreciate you taking the time to sit with me, and that's all we have.
Thank you.